Caroline Deason, and this is Rattling the Cage, the podcast that takes an up-close and personal look at one Nick Cage movie at a time, now on Repeater Radio. You can tune into broadcasts of this podcast and other fantastic programming and support independent weirdo radio by following @repeater_radio on Twitter and going to repeater-radio.com. Rattling the Cage is available for streaming and download wherever you get your podcasts as soon as the initial Repeater Radio broadcast concludes. Rattling the Cage is brought to you in part by the generous support of my Ko-Fi supporters. You can become a supporter too at ko-fi.com/Deason, D-I-E-Z-Y-N. Today's episode is about the 2000 movie. That sounds weird. The movie from the year 2000, The Family Man. It stars Téa Leoni, Jeremy Piven, Saul Rubinek, Don Cheadle, and of course, our man, Nicolas Cage. Here's the description from iTunes. High-powered Wall Street bachelor Jack Campbell, Academy Award winner Nicolas Cage, is living life in the fast lane until he gets the shock of a lifetime when he wakes up one morning in suburban New Jersey next to Kate, Téa Leoni, the girlfriend he left 13 years ago. Now, Jack's entire world is turned upside down. He's got 2 kids. He's traded in his Ferrari for a minivan while trying not to lose his mind. Can an upscale downtown player survive in middle-of-the-road suburbia? And what does it take for a once single-minded exec to really become the family man in this hilarious comedy about second thoughts and second chances? This movie opens up with Jack and Kate at the airport. Jack is leaving for a 1-year internship in London. Kate is worried because she thinks that they will not weather this time apart. Indeed, they don't. And the movie flash-forwards 13 years later to 2000. Jack is single, a very high-powered lawyer, having sex with babes. He's got a cool car. People like him. He intervenes in this strange situation at a variety store, a bodega, since it's in New York. Don Cheadle's character, whose name is Cash, I don't think that's actually said in the movie, but IMDb says so. Cash pulls a gun on the clerk when the clerk won't honor Cash's lottery ticket. There is some kind of strange race politics going on here that remind me of Menace to Society. Anyway, we see that this very successful man, whom everyone seems to get along with and like, is also brave when Jack intervenes and diffuses the situation. Okay, so to sum up, dude chose to go to the internship in London, and he told his girlfriend that their relationship would be fine because he loves her. Fast forward 13 years and they are no longer together, but he is happy, healthy, successful, and for some reason this means he should have an It's a Wonderful Life fantasy play out, but with a Christmas Carol twist. He's just done a good deed by intervening in this would-be armed robbery, and his repayment, when he says he's happy with his life, is for Cash, Don Cheadle's character, to uproot him from this life and put him in a dimension where he takes the place of the Jack Campbell who is married to Kate and who has 2 kids and a mortgage in the New Jersey suburbs. Okay, I made up the stuff about dimensions because the movie doesn't actually get into that much detail. He simply notices snow falling, and when he goes to bed, he wakes up in this other Jack's bed. Okay, my beef with this is that he seemed happy living the so-called child-free life. The rest of the movie supposedly is him learning that he's actually not that happy. I say supposedly because when the big monologue of the end comes and Jack talks about how great it is to be the Jack with the kids and the dog in the house, it doesn't feel earned. The movie is over 2 hours, but it doesn't seem to spend a lot of time on him actually falling in love with his very different life. He spends most of the time fighting against it. In fact, he only really starts to see value in it when his friend Arnie, played by Jeremy Piven, assures him that all his friends want to fuck his wife. He starts to look at her as an object other men desire, and that means he finds her desirable too. He thinks of this life as a failure because he's a salesman at a tire shop owned by his father-in-law rather than a high-powered Wall Street guy. Did I say he was a lawyer before? He's not a lawyer, sorry. He's not a lawyer, he's like a bank guy. You know, like he works on Wall Street and whatever, like that seems to be enough to like describe what people do. He's in acquisitions and mergers. This is all part of the problem generally about capitalism, is that it's all a big smokescreen, but that's a different podcast. Anyway, so in the new dimension, in the other dimension, Jack is a salesman at a tire shop owned by his father-in-law. We eventually find out that the reason he took the job is that his father-in-law had a heart attack and couldn't run it alone anymore, so Jack in this dimension acts selflessly. But I argue that he acted selflessly in the prime dimension when he intervened in the robbery too. The way he intervened was by telling Don Cheadle's character that he would buy the lottery ticket from him for $200, $30 or so less than what Don Cheadle's character says it's worth. And then he would cash it out at a different bodega where the clerk isn't, let's just say how it is, prejudiced against the black guy. Jack says he'll thereby make himself a profit, and Don Cheadle's character will get the most out of his money without the hassle of going elsewhere. Now, I infer the implication that Jack was never actually going to bother taking the ticket elsewhere. This guy routinely drops $800 on wine at restaurants on the regular. I don't think he really cares about the $200. I think he's just telling Don Cheadle's character that so that it doesn't look like he's being too charitable, which would insult him. He legit seemed to be doing this to help everyone involved diffuse this Christmas Eve catastrophe. So why then does he need to learn a lesson? Scrooge has to learn a lesson because he's a piece of shit greedy capitalist, obviously. George Bailey has to learn a lesson because he attempts to kill himself. But Jack wasn't hurting anyone. Jack was kind to the woman he slept with on Christmas Eve. He's kind to his doorman, whom he's helping with investment advice. He's kind to the security at his office. He's a little condescending with Saul Rubinek's character, his underling at the firm, but when he comes back to his dimension, he's just as condescending. By the way, both times he's this tiny bit condescending, I hesitate to even say condescending. It's more like encouraging in an imploring way. Saul Rubinek's character receives the criticism well and seems to appreciate it. Why does this guy have to learn a lesson? And what is the lesson exactly? Sure, his kids are super cute. Josh, the youngest one, is an infant in diapers. And there's this ridiculous scene where Jack, Prime Dimension Jack, who has never changed a diaper before apparently, gets completely disgusted by it. And Annie, the older daughter, who is about 5, I really liked how his daughter can tell that he's not her real dad, and she thinks that he's an alien who has replaced her dad. It's very cute. Eventually he comes around to the idea of kids, though we don't see a whole lot of wholesome interaction with them. This isn't like Jerry Maguire where he falls in love with the kid before he falls in love with the kid's mom. It's not to that extent, but maybe it was trying for that. Maybe there are deleted scenes where the kids bond with him more. But let's give the movie that as part of the lesson. Having kids can be good. Fine. But not everyone wants to have kids. Not everyone should have kids. Not everyone needs to have kids. And since the kids already exist in this parallel dimension, he won't have the same experience if he and Kate get together and have kids now in the prime dimension. They're already at least 5 years behind on that. I'm not saying that they can't start a family at that age, obviously. I'm saying that it won't be identical to the alternate dimensions experience. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because the aforementioned ending monologue spends a lot of time on how great these non-existent and never in this dimension existent kids are. So what other lessons are there? He has a wife who he still thinks is beautiful after all these years, and with whom he's still in love. The movie seems to think this is a big deal, the fact that their love endures. He mentions it in the monologue too. But this is also undermined by the fact that Prime Dimension Jack literally hasn't seen Kate in 13 years. So when he's astonished at her beauty, and she says, "How can you say that like you haven't been looking at me every day for the past 13 years? As in, aren't you tired of me yet?" That doesn't mean that Jack's love for Kate is cosmic in some way. He literally hasn't seen her in 13 years, and he's excited with infatuation at her beauty. This doesn't mean that this is going to last. And what about his sad life? Well, it's so sad that he tries to get a new job working at his Prime Dimension job. He uses his insider information from Prime Dimension life to impress the men in charge, and he's offered a position that pays double his salary at the tire store and has loads of perks. One of the perks is a plush apartment in Manhattan. He shows it to Kate and says that they can move there and put the kids into private schools. She can continue her work as a nonprofit lawyer working pro bono in New York City while he works in acquisitions and mergers on Wall Street. She immediately shuts this down, and her main reasons are that she doesn't want to move her kids from her kids' school, and she likes the fact that they started their family in that house in the suburb. Okay. So I'm not a family man, as in I don't have kids. I'm not married. I've been in a long-term relationship or two, I've also moved a few times, and once was to France for a year in a kind of internship. If my husband, whom I love, came home one day and said we can live in the city where we met, the city we used to live in, the city we moved away from because raising a kid in a tiny apartment in the city would be hard on our terrible salaries, and that I could continue working as a pro bono lawyer, my passion, but now I would never have to worry about how I'm going to make ends meet, as I do my really noble charitable work, and that my kids would go to great schools, I would probably think about it for a little longer than this lady did. I especially wouldn't put a lot of stock into whether or not my 5-year-old would be sad about moving to another school. Kids have to move schools all the time and very rarely into such great new circumstances. A 5-year-old is going to make new best friends the day she starts at her Manhattan school. Am I crazy? I don't have kids, as I said. Okay, hold on. I'm going to ask 2 of my friends who have kids who are older than this kid in the movie. Be right back.
Jack Campbell thought he had everything.
All right, I asked them if they'd turn down a much better paying job in a city they like with the perk of a fancy place to live and the ability to put your kids into private schools, if it meant that their 5-year-old would have to make new friends and join a different ballet class. Both of my friends said the same thing I did. Kids, especially young ones like that, make new friends wherever they go and will be fine. That's the easiest time, in fact, to change schools. This kid in the movie isn't socially inept or anything. I believe she would have been fine. Kate's other complaint is that she had envisioned them in that house growing old together. I can see being sentimental about a house to an extent, but again, can we talk about this for a bit? Granted, Jack didn't tell her he was going out for this job, but I bet that was partly because he wanted an offer on the table before he brought it up to her. Also, she had just told him that she sometimes wishes she could have everything she wants without having to worry about money, so maybe he thought she'd be more on board. She says that she imagines them growing old and him painting the deck. He doesn't want to do that in his old age. Why should he want to do that? He wants to pay someone to do that, or not even have a deck. She shuts all of this down, so he compromises and says that, okay, he'll commute to work. They can stay in New Jersey and he'll commute. She also shuts this down because he'd be commuting 3 hours a day because of traffic. Okay, people do this all the time for much less pay. A dude who's making that much money can probably take 3-day weekends more often than a dude working at the tire store. Also, he can probably commute like a little later in the day because he's like the president or whatever. He's a big time executive. Maybe he's not the president in this dimension, but he's a big time executive. He can probably come in at 10 a.m. rather than 9 a.m. or whatever. This reminds me of my favorite episode of The Simpsons, to be honest. It's called You Only Move Twice. Homer falls ass backwards into an incredible new job in a new city. He's being paid way more. They have been given a huge house with futuristic conveniences. The kids go to a better school, and Homer's job for the first time since he worked at the bowling alley is actually fulfilling for him. He finds this to be rewarding, and he's not as depressed. He ends up quitting this new dream job and moving the family back home to their mediocre lives in Springfield, even though he doesn't want to. This is because Marge is bored since the house is self-cleaning, and she has nothing to do during the day. Bart has been accidentally put into a remedial class at school and he's miserable, and Lisa is allergic to all the wildflowers in town. I hate this. I hate this because Marge finally has time to pursue any of her many dreams that she was forced to give up when she got pregnant, like her painting, or get a part-time job, which she wants to do many times over the series, or literally anything else. Play with Maggie some more because Maggie's also miserable because she's just stuck in that swingamajig all day long. Someone could just go to the school and clear things up about Bart being in this remedial class. He probably should go into 3rd grade and not 4th grade. He probably does need to be held back a little bit, but not in the remedial class. And Lisa literally just needs some Claritin. But instead of these simple fixes that would allow each of them to live overall better lives once they've made these adjustments, Homer has to sacrifice everything and go back to a job he doesn't like. This is not compromise. I don't get it. I really hate it. Though it's my favorite episode. In a lot of ways, that's the movie The Family Man starring Nicolas Cage. I'm really frustrated by this movie, if you can't tell. At one point, Jack says that he has to pull them out of their suburban mediocrity because he, quote, needs to do this as a man for all of us. End quote. It's not secret that Jack feels emasculated in this dimension. He can't see how a version of him could be happy in what is, by comparison, squalor. And as I mentioned before, he doesn't seem to find his own wife very desirable until he hears that other men might want her. In fact, after he says he needs to do this as a man, he says that he wants to give them the kind of life that other people envy. Kate tells him that people do envy their lives. The movie kind of begins to approach an interrogation of masculinity and an interrogation of how a crappy, low-paying job and life with one woman in suburbia would be emasculating. But it seems to say that the way to get around that is to just settle, rather than to actually be excited about whatever's going on in this life. And the way to settle is to notice that other people wish they were you. This is not healthy. So I have a bone to pick with this idea that other people also envy their lives, because everyone at the Christmas party and at bowling night all seem to be living pretty similar lives to them. Their friend Evelyn wants to screw around on her husband with Jack, and Arnie mentions that in the past he's been tempted by extramarital affairs, but the movie doesn't really show us that Jack and Kate's life is enviable by any of these people. It shows us that Jack's friends would have sex with his wife if they could, but it only shows us that after Jack expresses interest in having sex with one of his friends' wives. So what's going on here exactly? I don't want the movie to show me a bunch of miserable people and then hold up Jack and Kate and their kids as enviable. I want the movie to earn what it insists on and help me understand why Jack has a change of heart and falls back in love with Kate and wants to be a dad. I'm not saying that these things couldn't attract him or make him want to stay there in that dimension. I'm saying I didn't feel that this movie did a good enough job proving to me that he should want to stay there. Another strange thing is that precisely when Jack decides he wants to stay in this dimension, Don Cheadle's character shows up again and tells him that now he has to go back to the other dimension that he's just decided he's not as attracted to at this point. Why is this angel punishing Jack like this? What's the point? Again, this guy was not a bad dude. He was living his life and seemed to be genuinely kind to other people. He was part of the problem overall because he works on Wall Street, but come on. So he spends a tragic last night with the family he has grown so fond of, falls asleep, and wakes up in his penthouse back in the original dimension. He goes to work. He called a meeting on Christmas Day. Is this the issue? It's not a parallel with Scrooge here because there actually is a timely emergency going on in their silly American no Boxing Day schedule, which means that they have to make decisions before the deal goes through the day after Christmas. The vibe in the office isn't at all as desperately sad as Cratchit about missing time with family on Christmas Day. These are all high-powered executives. And even if it was, this seems to be an exceptional circumstance because of the deal of the decade going through the day after Christmas, rather than a pattern of mean and thoughtless behavior from the president. Again, his coworkers seem to like him. Anyway, he goes into work and tells everyone what to do, and then he says that he will rush out to Aspen to try to seal the deal with whomever, and that once he's done, he will go skiing alone because he is completely and utterly alone. He was fine being alone before he did a good deed and was forced to see this alternate dimension. Also, I'm sure he'd find someone or many someones to spend his time in Aspen with if he wanted to. And just because he hasn't found the right person since he broke up with Kate doesn't mean he never will. About that, we never learn why in Prime Dimension they break up. We have no idea. Why the hell couldn't their relationship last 1 year of long distance? I know this was 1987 and there were no FaceTime calls or whatever, but I also know that New York City and London aren't that hard to travel between, and that 1 year is not very long at all. Should he really be spending the rest of his life and raising a family with someone who he couldn't even weather 1 year apart from? At the end of the movie, he looks Kate up. Well, I forgot to say that in the Prime Dimension, at the beginning of the movie, she had contacted his office before he had his alternate dimension trip, and he decided not to call her back. Anyway, he has had this change of heart, so he looks her up and goes to her apartment. Turns out the reason she contacted him was because she's moving to Paris that very night, Christmas night, and she has a box of his things she wants to return to him. They have not seen each other for 13 years. She returns a copy of Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, a bottle of cologne, and some other random odds and ends. Absolutely nobody is returning that shit to their ex after 13 years. Absolutely nobody is keeping that shit for 13 years. We're not talking about priceless family heirlooms or something. By the way, I assume that the reason that the book is a Kurt Vonnegut book is because in some Vonnegut novels, there's ideas of different dimensions and time travel and things like that. Cat's Cradle isn't one of them, so I don't know 100% if the authors were, or if the screenwriters were getting at that, but I did notice that. But it wasn't like it was a first edition Cat's Cradle. Nobody's keeping this to give back. Anyway, while he's at her place, he overhears her flight information, so we all know what's going to happen next. He blows off his trip to Aspen and rushes to her gate to try to stop her. She tells him no, she's definitely getting on this plane and moving to Paris for this great opportunity. Sound familiar? So, in order to convince her to stay, or at least to have coffee with him and talk it over, something that she wouldn't do in the alternate dimension, when he said they should move back to Manhattan, he starts telling her in detail about their kids, their house, and her job in the alternate dimension. He even says things about the kids that we didn't see him experience on screen. She's somehow endeared by this hallucination that he's conjuring and decides to have coffee with him. She blows off her trip and goes to have coffee with him instead. So one nice thing that the movie does is end it here, as they're having coffee in the concourse at the airport. He mentioned earlier that he just wants to have coffee and she can get on the next plane to Paris that is surely leaving that night, Christmas night, after 7 p.m. Maybe there is, I doubt it, but whatever. Anyway, this movie lets us imagine what would happen because it just zooms out on them having a nice chat and the credits roll. So, let's imagine that instead of holding her back from her career, he joins her in Paris. He either quits his job and gets a new one there, or he becomes a house husband and lives off his savings and her great salary, or he finagles it so that he can work in Paris for his company, which I'm sure isn't unheard of. It's the year 2000, remember, by this point. Email exists. You can even text. Amazing. The future. Let's imagine they have kids because they decide they want to in this dimension after all. The kids grow up in Paris, which is like the New York City of France, which is like the New Jersey suburb of Europe. Depending on how you feel about France, I can say that because I've lived there. So it's the best of both worlds, happy ending. Or, let's imagine that they decide that, hey, they haven't spoken in 13 years. They are completely different people than they were, and this isn't going to work out. But Jack understands now that he wants to start a family. He dates and he finds someone and has a family. And Kate does whatever the hell she pleases. Happy ending. Or let's imagine that they haven't spoken in 13 years and aren't compatible anymore, etc., and that Jack realizes that the life he has in this dimension is actually fulfilling as it is. That his choices about not having a family are valid, and that if he is unfulfilled, he can make changes to become happier. But based on what we saw at the beginning of the movie, he was doing pretty okay. Kate does whatever the hell she pleases, happy ending. This movie doesn't refer to Don Cheadle's character as an angel, though he does have a bicycle bell he gives to Jack in a reference that to It's a Wonderful Life that really doesn't make a lot of sense or have a lot of payoff. The movie, therefore, doesn't specifically make any reference to a higher power or anything. I'm asking, is this a horror movie? Is Don Cheadle's character some sort of malevolent demon fucking with Jack for no good reason? Do Jack and Kate throw away their respective careers and lives and try to make a go of it in New Jersey only to end up miserable and divorced, broke, and more alone than ever? Maybe even with some maladjusted children who have also been swept up in this terrible cosmic prank? I think this movie is enjoyable in the way that a lot of Christmassy movies are. You know, they make you feel kind of warm and fuzzy, and you're not meant to overthink them. You're definitely not meant to dissect them on a podcast, and yet here I am, dissecting it. As Nicolas Cage's character, Jack, says, I'm going to do that because that is my life. That's what's real, and there's nothing I can do to change that. Nick Cage was great in it. He has a couple of those trademark single line shouts where his character goes from 0 to 100 on the crazy scale for just a second. We love those. There's a great part where he forces a laugh, and a less discerning Cage viewer might think that he doesn't know what he's doing, but I know that this is a deliberate choice he's made to make us understand that his character was forcing the laugh. I know this because I have so completely come to understand that everything this man does is deliberate, which makes watching him in all types of roles so fascinating. Even just seeing the family photos and the poses he's striking in them becomes interesting when you understand how much calculated effort he's putting in there. And of course, the movie opens with an underwear-only clad Cage singing opera in front of floor-to-ceiling windows in his penthouse. How could you not like that? So the iTunes description called this movie hilarious, and I wouldn't really agree, though there were funny parts. It's funnier than It's a Wonderful Life, surely. But with some cutesy feel-goodery and a score by Danny Elfman, I could see myself watching this as part of my holiday movie rotation in the future. I think Cage was great, as I said. I think the screenplay's main premise and Don Cheadle's character were both underdeveloped, and I thought the kids were very, very cute. That was The Family Man. You can find Rattling the Cage's social media at linktree.com/rattlingthecage. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, follow, and all that other great stuff. Let me know what you thought of the movie. Let me know what you think of this episode. Let me know if you want me to move to Manhattan with you. The next episode is going to be a brand new movie from 2023 called The Old Way. Yeehaw! I'm Caroline Deason. Thanks for listening to Rattling the Cage.